I've been in a bit of a funk lately, not really knowing what sort of content I want to make. The playthroughs are fun and SRB2 mod reviews always do well, but I've also done more than 150 of them, and there haven't been any recent releases I've been dying to try out. So, I ask you guys what you want to see. More mod reviews were the obvious requests, and I've been asked a few times now to redo my mod ranking. I'll do it someday, but seeing as, like I just said, I've now covered more than 150 of them, it's a little more of a task than the original version was. There were some joke answers, like rank every texture in SRB2, and someone asked me to rank every emblem location. Okay, but the request I'm most interested in doing is a boss ranking. Got a few people asking for that, and definitely not because I wrote my community post in a leading manner to reach that conclusion. And it's something I probably should have done a fair while back. Back when I first started making commentated videos, I did rankings on every vanilla character and every vanilla level, but I never got around to doing the bosses, and I could not tell you why. Maybe it was for the best though, because my opinions on SRB2's bosses have changed dramatically over the last few years, and my current ranking is very different to what I would have said back then, as a wee beginner to the game. So, without further ado, here's my ranking of all of SRB2's bosses, from worst to best. But before we begin proper, I have a few simple ground rules. Firstly, I'm almost entirely viewing these bosses from a gameplay perspective, disregarding things like their music and design. Seeing as half of the bosses use the same fight theme and look pretty much the same as one another, it'd be pretty redundant talking about how one Eggmobile derivative is more visually interesting than a different Eggmobile derivative. I also will not be considering the stages leading up to the bosses, as that's a whole different thing and not really relevant in any of their cases, seeing as most are entirely separate to their preceding levels due to how SRB2 is structured. I am considering these bosses from a purely vanilla standpoint. No physics mods, no difficulty modifiers, and no custom characters. Unsurprisingly, the power creep of most custom characters make every vanilla boss a cakewalk, minor roadblocks at most, and certainly not climactic moments of the game. I also won't consider how Fang fits into each boss, because his pop gun allows you to ignore all of their attacks and most of their defensive measures. And finally, I should mention that I have no idea what the general consensus is on each boss, so remember that all of this is just my opinion. Personally, I don't think any of the bosses are that good, with most just being a bit mediocre. Please be civil in my comments, but with that out of the way, my pick for the worst SRB2 boss hasn't changed since I first finished the game all of those years ago. Without a doubt, my pick for the worst SRB2 boss has to go to Black Core Act 2, the Metal Sonic fight. This is the only fight in the game where, regardless of the character I pick, vanilla or not, regardless of how I go about approaching the fight, I still struggle with to this day. The worst part is, he's mostly a good fight. Easily one of the best in the game. His attack patterns are fun yet fair, his crisis point is unique, even if it is much easier than his previous phase. He gets more difficult with every attack, which, as you'll find out as we progress, is something I rate highly in a boss, and there's a little difference in how you can approach him depending on the character. Not a huge amount, but again, that is something I rate a boss highly for. There's just one problem that makes all of these good points irrelevant. Actually hitting him. After every attack string, he'll drop back down to the ground and hover around you, but before you can damage him, you need to first intimidate him into dashing away, which is what finally makes him vulnerable. The problem is that this is incredibly inconsistent. Sometimes it's really easy to intimidate him, and he'll dash away the second you get anywhere near him. Other times, you can back him into a corner and practically jump on top of him, and he still will not fly away. In my experience, there's no rhyme or reason to this, and nothing you can do to tell how he'll react to a given situation. Sometimes he's so nonplussed by everything that he never spins out, and it's just best to restart the fight over, wasting your time trying to scare a brick wall. I've tried everything over the years, to no avail, and it's a massive blot on what could very well be the best boss in the game. Ambitious, unique, interesting conceptually, but with a very flawed execution. But with that, the real struggle with ranking the bosses starts here, because my experience now with fighting them all means they all just blend together at this point. Outside of Metal Sonic at the bottom, and a few stands out at the top, I'd say most of the bosses are pretty much of an equal quality, mediocre 5 out of 10s. But as I have to pick one boss to be number 6, I'm going to pick Egg Slimer, the Techno Hill boss. As the second boss you'll encounter in your journey, it's natural that the Slimer would be easy, but I'd say that it's actually even easier than the first boss, the Eggmobile. It has one mode of attack: spew toxic sludge around the arena, hoping you either walk over the puddles it leaves, or get hit by a blob as it flies through the air. You may very well get hit by one of these blobs, but only because they fly out at random, and when your only method of attack is to jump straight into the machine, you can never guarantee the safety of your jump. Ironically, it has the exact opposite problem Metal Sonic had. Whereas he was unpredictable to the point of tedium, the Egg Slimer is so predictable that without a way to compensate or mix things up, every single fight against it goes the exact same way. Sit at the end of the arena, then jump into it to reverse its path and set it up for the next hit. All it can do is speed up and occasionally reverse its path itself, but neither of these diminish the effectiveness of the strategy I just discussed. Even its crisis point is neutralized by doing this, as it just starts jumping towards you, jumping back when you land a hit. Stay in one place, and it'll keep running into your attacks with little success. Understandably, very easy, but as a result, very dull. I'm going to be giving the number 5 spot to Fang, who you face at the end of Arid Canyon. I've never loved this fight, as I initially disliked it due to finding it fairly tough. I wasn't used to the controls and kept getting hit by their cork shot, or failing to get out of the way of a bomb. Now, I dislike it because it's really boring. Between attacks, Fang jumps around the arena for ages, not doing anything and ultimately just wasting everyone's time. I think you can hit him as he does this at very specific moments, but that's risky and difficult enough for so little benefit that I never really bother. He does technically get tougher each time you land a hit, but do you know how that materializes? By spending even more time hopping around doing nothing. He ranks above the previous two because he at least balances difficulty and predictability better than Metal Sonic or the Egg Slimer do, and he can catch you out the first few times you fight with his multiple attacks and multi-layered arena, but he doesn't have that oomph that separates the good from the bad. Although, as much as I said these things won't affect the ranking, I do have to mention how he has the best exit animation upon defeat, jumping into a trackside slide just like a Looney Tunes villain. Nice touch. I'm placing the Eggmobile, the boss of Greenflower Mountain, in 4th, mostly because of how aggressive you can be with it. Most SRB2 bosses have some sort of mandatory downtime where you can't do anything against it. Some bosses do that well, such as the ones higher on the list, and some do it poorly, like how Fang just wastes ever more of your time doing nothing. Because the Eggmobile is just there, floating in front of you in the arena, you can charge in and pile on the attacks to take it down quickly, or stay back and only rush in after dodging its laser attacks. I also like how there's a sharp but fair and consistent spike in difficulty after it reaches crisis point, whereas most prior entries actually become easier at this stage. Yet you can still make risky plays to rack up damage quickly. As such, there's just a little more room for player expression than usual, and while it's too simple for me to really place it any higher, it also has no major flaws like previous entries did. Maybe the fact that it has a habit of flying a little too high and out of reach of basic jumps for an attack or two? Hard to call that a deal breaker though. Simple yet effective, and a good capstone for the introduction of the game. Third place goes to the final boss of the game, Brak Eggman, or at the very least, the current final boss of the game. Brak Eggman is actually the boss for a currently unimplemented zone called Dark City, but we're never going to see that level, considering it's not going to make an appearance until Red Volcano is finished in like 2045. As it is though, you'd never know that Brak Eggman isn't intended to be the climactic final battle, seeing as it is probably the most mechanically complex and engaging fight in the game. It's the only boss with more than 8 health points, instead having 12. It has by far the most unique attacks. Metal Sonic does have more, but you ultimately react to all of them in the same way, unlike here. And I say it's the most difficult fight in the game. There's some interesting arena control mechanics with how most of its attacks leave fire on the ground. It requires an extra step to deal damage beyond just jumping into it. And because its patterns are slowly altered as it takes damage, the difficulty rises throughout the fight rather than just jumping up when the crisis point is reached. In many ways, I'd say it's the boss that best fulfills its potential. The only reason I'm only giving it a third is because of 2 flaws. Firstly, its missile attack could do with a little animation before firing. As it is, the missiles come out instantly. If he does it right in front of you, there's absolutely no way you're dodging it. If you're past the crisis point and he does something like this, you're dead. No way around it. Secondly, the acid pipes could be moved a little further into the arena. As it is, they're so close to the arena edge that my camera tends to get stuck in the walls, which make it quite difficult to track a Brak Eggman and tell if he's about to attack. Easily the most complex boss in the game, but I think 2 bosses, despite their relative simplicity, are more enjoyable. In second place, we have the Sea Egg, boss of Deep Sea Zone. I couldn't exactly place why I've grown to enjoy this boss more so than most of the others, which makes it a bit difficult to justify this ranking. But if I had to say something, I'd say the Sea Egg just works. It's part of the initial trio of bosses that are just Eggmobile derivatives, so it's really easy and doesn't require much brain power, and you can't really speed up the fight due to the disappearing mechanic, but there is just a tiny little bit of depth here that most of the other fights lack. For example, Need to figure out which of the 3 machines is the real Sea Egg after the Crisis Point upgrade? Well, you can look at their sprites, or you can look at the electric wave to pinpoint your target. You need to have a little patience, as charging in as soon as the Sea Egg appears generally means you get hit by their rocket attack. However, if you stay back and wait for half a second, the attack will always miss you. You don't need to take any of this into account to win the fight, but it means there's a little more strategy than previous fights, while not suffering from any major flaws like later ones tend to have. It's simple, but well designed, uses the arena well, has an interesting and meaningful Crisis Point upgrade. It's definitely one of the better bosses in the game. You may have very well noticed that I've only listed 7 bosses on this ranking, and possibly thought to yourself, the Aquaman, why have you done that? There are 8 bosses in SRB2, so which one have you missed out? Well, I've never really seen the Metal Sonic race as a boss fight, so it's going down on this list only as an honourable mention. If I was placing it on this list, it would definitely be around this point in the ranking. I just think the concept of a race against a rival is the perfect choice for any Sonic game. But I feel it lacks the most important aspect of a boss: interactivity. This isn't a race against an opponent that is trying to stop you from reaching your goal. It's a standard platforming course with a visual representation for your time limit. If there was a way to slow Metal Sonic down, or if he left obstacles for you to avoid, maybe I'd consider him to be a boss. But as it is, you can't even touch him. It's a relatively tough platforming segment. I remember taking ages to beat him when I first reached Black Core, but he's not enough of a physical presence in the stage for me to consider him as a boss. Feel free to disagree with me, but if an antagonist lacks even a single in-game attack, then I can't consider them a boss. But through the power of logic and reasoning, you'll have already figured out my pick for the number 1 spot. The boss of Castle Eggman, the Egg Coliseum. This is a big part of why I'm sort of glad I waited so long to do this ranking. Once upon a time, this was probably my top 3 worst bosses, alongside Metal Sonic and Brak Eggman. I found it too difficult, I found it too slow, and I found it too restrictive. Herded by the rows of maces around the circular arena, I probably spent a good half an hour fighting this boss before I first defeated him. By this point though, having learned the tips and tricks to beat him, and playing around with characters other than Sonic, I think this is the most unique boss in the game. It makes great use of its arena, with threats on both the upper and lower segments. It gets more challenging as it takes damage, with more and more of the arena floor being replaced with thorns, and it's one of very few bosses for which you can take advantage of each character's unique abilities. Sonic can use his Thok to hit Eggman faster in the second phase, as can Knuckles with his glide, while Amy, Metal Sonic and Tails can use their abilities to travel around or above the Egg Robos. Tails and Knuckles can also make themselves slightly safer reaching the upper level by ignoring the springs and travelling up before the maces become active, either using their fly or climb. The tipping point for me was finding out that timing your jump right means almost every character can jump over the maces in the first phase, which makes it that much faster and more exciting. At that point, I became a true Egg Coliseum stan. The only flaw, and it is admittedly a big one, is that the second phase is a little boring. You just sit there and wait ages for Eggman to reach your side of the arena to attack. The only positive about that is that attacking him has the opposite effect to hitting Fang. He speeds up, so it takes less time to land the next hit. Flawed? Yes, but I think the Air Coliseum is my pick for the best boss in SRB2. So, what do you think? As I said at the start, I don't know what the general opinion is on any of SRB2's bosses or their quality as a complete package, but I've got to say that I've never loved them all that much. I think the bosses up to Fang are just bad, the bosses up to the Sea Egg are mediocre, and then the only last two are what I'd consider to be good. They all just suffer from the nature of SRB2. A small group of unpaid volunteers can only do so much making a momentum platformer on an engine from 1998 that doesn't naturally have slopes and momentum physics, when all the old staff have left and at any one point, half the new staff are working on other projects. Hopefully, as we get new major updates someday, we'll get better bosses that take advantage of improved physics and arena design opportunities. For now though, I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.